He stood quietly by the ballroom door, a tall, calm black man in a crisp security uniform. No one knew his name and no one cared to ask, until the white bride, full of pride and champagne, mocked him in front of everyone, laughing as she called him just the help. But what she didn't know was that this guard was not only a decorated army general, but also the head of her billionaire father's personal security detail. By the end of the night, her laughter would fade into silence, when the truth came out and the room froze in stunned disbelief. Before we find out what happens next, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe respect should never depend on status, hit that like button. The air in the Monroe Grand Ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and freshly cut lilies. Crystal chandeliers, each one the size of a small car, hung from the high, ornate ceiling, casting a warm, golden light across the room. The sound was a symphony of wealth, the clinking of champagne flutes, the soft murmur of polite conversation, and the gentle melodies of a string quartet playing in the corner. This was a world of privilege, a carefully constructed bubble where everything and everyone had a price, a place, and a purpose. By the main entrance, standing perfectly still, was a man who seemed to defy this easy categorization. His name was Marcus Hayes, and he wore the simple dark uniform of the hotel's security staff. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of a life of discipline. His expression was calm, his dark eyes sweeping across the crowd with a practiced, methodical gaze. He wasn't watching the party. He was scanning for threats, analyzing movement, and mapping the room in his mind. To the guests who floated by in their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, he was invisible. He was part of the background, a silent fixture meant to ensure their comfort without ever intruding upon it. Lydia Monroe, the bride, was the center of this universe. In her flowing white dress with diamonds sparkling at her throat and in her hair, she was the sun around which every other planet in the room revolved. She moved with an easy confidence, a product of a life where every door had been opened for her, every wish granted. Her laughter was loud, a little too sharp, and it carried across the ballroom as she held court with a circle of her admirers. She had had just enough champagne to feel bold, to feel that the world was her stage and everyone else was merely an actor. Her eyes fell upon Marcus, standing stoic and silent by the door. In her world, a man in a uniform like his was not a person but a function. He was there to serve, to be silent, to be ignored. But tonight, Lydia felt playful. She saw his stillness not as discipline, but as a blank canvas on which she could paint her own amusement. She turned to her friends, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Watch this," she whispered, her voice conspiratorial. She glided over to Marcus, her friends trailing behind her like eager puppies. She stopped directly in front of him, her smile widening as she looked him up and down, a clear, dismissive appraisal. "Excuse me," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Marcus's gaze shifted to her, his expression unchanged. He gave a slight professional nod. "Ma'am." The single word, spoken in a low, steady voice, seemed to irk her. It was too calm, too professional. It lacked the deference she expected. "Are you lost?" she asked, a fake sweetness coating her words. "I didn't realize the hotel was letting the janitorial staff attend the party." A few of her friends tittered, their nervous laughter encouraging her. The guests nearby paused their conversations, their eyes darting toward the unfolding scene. Marcus remained still. His eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment she felt a strange flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was an unnerving quietness, a depth she couldn't comprehend. He said nothing. His silence was his shield, and it was impenetrable. But Lydia saw it as weakness. She pressed on, emboldened. "Or perhaps you're guarding the dessert table?" she continued, gesturing vaguely toward the lavish display of cakes and pastries. "Making sure no one steals a cookie? A very important job, I'm sure." Now the laughter from her friends was louder, more confident. A ripple of unease spread through the older guests. They recognized the cruelty in her tone. the casual disregard for another human being. Lydia's mother, a woman who understood the delicate art of social appearances, hurried over. She touched her daughter's arm, her face tight with embarrassment. "Lydia, darling, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. "Don't make a scene." Lydia shrugged off her mother's hand, her arrogance swelling with the attention. "Oh, relax, Mother. I'm just having a little fun. It's my wedding day, after all." She gave Marcus one last dismissive look before turning her back on him and rejoining her friends, who showered her with praise for her savage humor. The music swelled again, a cheerful melody that felt jarringly out of place. The tension in the air, however, did not dissipate. It clung to the corner of the room where Marcus stood, a silent testament to the ugliness that had just transpired. He did not flinch. He did not react. His posture remained perfect, his gaze once again sweeping across the room as if nothing had happened. He was a professional, and his mission was not over. From across the room, a young waitress named Elena Torres watched the entire exchange. She was refilling champagne flutes, her movements swift and practiced. But her eyes had been fixed on the scene by the door. She had seen the bride's smug expression, heard her cutting words, and felt a knot of anger tighten in her stomach. She looked at the security guard. He was black, and she was Latina. She knew what it was like to be treated as invisible, to be dismissed as the help. But there was something different about this man. It was in his stance, the way he held his head, the unwavering calm in his eyes. It was a posture of command, not of subservience. It didn't match the cheap hotel uniform he was wearing. Something was off, and Elena's intuition told her this was far from over. The night was still young, and the echoes of Lydia's cruel laughter still hung in the air, waiting for an answer. Marcus Hayes stood his post, the echo of Lydia's insult fading into the general hum of the ballroom. His pulse remained steady, his breathing even. On the outside, he was a statue of professional calm. On the inside, his mind was a fortress of discipline, a place where emotion could not breach the walls of duty. He replayed the directive he had received that morning, the words of his commanding officer, General Steele, echoing with perfect clarity in his memory. The call had come in on a secure line, the connection crisp and free of static. "Marcus," Steele's familiar voice had said, "the assignment is live. Your cover is hotel security. Your objective is the protection of Colonel Andrew Monroe and his family during the wedding festivities. Stay discreet. Blend in. Do not, under any circumstances, reveal your identity unless the threat level escalates to critical. Is that understood?" Marcus had responded with a simple, "Understood, sir." It was a straightforward mission, albeit an unusual one. A four-star general posing as a low-level security guard was not standard protocol, but Colonel Monroe was not a standard client. He was a key figure in a series of highly sensitive international defense contracts, and intelligence had suggested a potential threat. Monroe had requested the best, but he had also requested absolute discretion. He didn't want a team of obvious bodyguards alarming his guests. He wanted a ghost, a silent protector. General Steele had chosen Marcus for his unparalleled record in covert operations and his unshakable composure under pressure. Now that composure was being tested not by an assassin's bullet, but by a bride's arrogance. Marcus watched Lydia as she mingled with her guests, her laughter grating on the ear. She was completely oblivious, cocooned in her own privilege. Her ignorance, he thought, was a vulnerability. It was louder and more dangerous than the music from the band because it was unpredictable. He knew her file. Lydia Monroe, only child of Colonel Andrew Monroe, spoiled, entitled, with a history of minor social scandals that her father's money had always managed to erase. She was a blind spot in her father's otherwise meticulous life. The irony was a bitter pill. He was here to protect the family of a man he deeply respected, a fellow soldier who had served his country with honor. And that man's daughter had just humiliated him with a casual cruelty that was breathtaking in its thoughtlessness. He felt a presence approach him from his left. It was one of the groomsmen, a young man with a flushed face and the clumsy movements of someone who had had too much to drink. "Hey, you," the groomsman slurred, pointing a finger at Marcus's chest. "You're in the way. We're trying to get a picture." He made a move to shove Marcus aside, a foolish act of drunken bravado. Marcus didn't brace himself. He didn't push back. With a subtle shift of his weight and a small step backward, he simply allowed the groomsman's momentum to carry him past. The young man stumbled, catching himself before he could fall. He looked back at Marcus, confused, as if he couldn't understand why his push had met with nothing but air. Marcus simply looked at him, his expression unreadable. The groomsman, sobered slightly by the silent rebuke, mumbled an apology and hurried away. This was the power Marcus possessed. It was not the power of aggression, but the power of stillness, of control. It was a quiet dignity that unsettled those who expected a reaction. It was the calm at the center of the storm. Those who had witnessed the bride's mockery had expected him to look angry, or ashamed, or perhaps even intimidated. Instead, he looked patient. And that was the most unnerving response of all. The narration of the night was being written in two different languages. To the guests, he was a piece of furniture, a silent guard who had been briefly and unpleasantly animated by the bride's joke. But the audience, the silent observers of this story, were now being let in on the secret. This was not just a security guard. This was General Marcus Hayes, a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers, a strategist who had outmaneuvered enemies on a global scale. He was a weapon, carefully concealed in the plain sight of a hotel uniform. And the woman who had just insulted him, the spoiled child of the very man he was sworn to protect, had no idea that she had just lit the fuse on a bomb of her own making. Marcus continued his silent watch, his mind already moving past the insult, focusing back on the mission. The exits, the windows, the faces in the crowd. Every detail was filed away, assessed. Lydia's arrogance had just insulted the man her father trusted with his very life. The night was far from over, and a reckoning was quietly, patiently, waiting in the wings. Later that evening, as the wedding reception began to wind down, Marcus stood in the quiet solitude of a private suite on the hotel's executive floor. The suite had been reserved for the security detail, a sterile, impersonal space that served as his temporary command center. He loosened his tie, the first sign of relaxation he had shown all night. A small encrypted device on the desk buzzed softly. He picked it up. It was a coded message from General Steele. The text was brief, devoid of any pleasantries. "Change of protocol. Family meeting scheduled tomorrow. 1,000 hours. Hotel. Boardroom. You will attend. Full dress uniform." Marcus read the message twice. A slow, knowing nod was his only reply. Full dress uniform. The order was clear. The time for discretion was over. The time for truth was approaching. He sent back a one-word reply. Acknowledged. He knew what this meant. Colonel Monroe would be there, his wife would be there, Lydia would be there. And he, General Marcus Hayes, would be there not as a silent guard, but as a commanding officer. The power dynamic was about to shift, and it was going to shift dramatically. Meanwhile, in the hallway of the lavish bridal suite, Elena Torres was collecting discarded champagne glasses from a room service cart. The party was over, but her work was not. The corridor was mostly quiet, the sounds of celebration replaced by the low hum of the hotel's ventilation system. As she worked, she heard a burst of laughter from behind the partially open door of the bride's suite. It was Lydia's voice, still sharp, still dripping with self-satisfaction. Elena froze, her hand hovering over a glass. She couldn't help but overhear. "And did you see his face?" Lydia was saying, her voice giddy. "He just stood there, like a statue. It was priceless. I really put that guard in his place." Her bridesmaids giggled in response, their laughter a chorus of sycophantic approval. "You were amazing, Lydia," one of them said. "He totally deserved it. Some people just need to be reminded of where they belong." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. The casual cruelty, the complete lack of remorse. It was worse than she had imagined. Something inside her snapped. This wasn't just a rude comment made in the heat of the moment. This was a reflection of a deeply ugly character. Without thinking, her hand moved to the phone in her apron pocket. Her fingers, trembling slightly, found the video record button. She held the phone up discreetly, pointing the camera's lens toward the crack in the door. The audio was crystal clear. She captured Lydia's voice as she continued to brag, reenacting the moment for her friends. Her words a venomous cocktail of arrogance and classism. Elena knew she was taking a huge risk. If she were caught, she would be fired on the spot. The Monroe family was powerful. They could probably have her blacklisted from every hotel in the city, but her conscience screamed louder than her fear. She thought of the guard's face, his unwavering dignity in the face of such disrespect. He had stood there and taken it without a word. Maybe he couldn't speak up for himself, but she could. She recorded for another 30 seconds, capturing more than enough to paint a clear picture of Lydia's character. Then, with a quiet click, she stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She felt a strange mixture of terror and empowerment. She had evidence. She didn't know what she would do with it or if she would do anything at all, but as she pushed her cart down the silent hotel corridor, she sensed that something big was coming. The atmosphere in the hotel felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. She decided to hold on to the recording, just in case. The truth, she thought, might need a little help coming out, and she was now holding that truth in the palm of her hand. 2 weeks before the wedding, the briefing had taken place in a sterile, windowless room at the Pentagon. The only decoration was the American flag standing in the corner. General Robert Steele, a man whose stern face was etched with the lines of countless difficult decisions, stood before a large digital screen. Across from him sat General Marcus Hayes. The screen displayed a file photo of Colonel Andrew Monroe, a decorated officer with a storied career, now a highly successful private contractor in the defense industry. "Andrew Monroe has made some powerful enemies, Marcus," General Steele began, his voice low and serious. "His latest series of contracts involves next-generation drone technology. Very sensitive, very valuable. We have credible intelligence suggesting a possible security threat. Not from a foreign power, but from a corporate rival who plays dirty, very dirty." Marcus listened, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture relaxed but attentive. He absorbed every word, every nuance. Steele continued. "Andrew requested a protection detail for his daughter's wedding. He specifically asked for it to be discreet. He doesn't want to alarm his family or his guests. He wants a ghost." He paused, looking directly at Marcus. "That's why I'm asking you to do this. No one is better at being a ghost than you. You'll be undercover as part of the hotel's internal security team. You'll have eyes on everything, but no one will have eyes on you." Marcus nodded. "I understand the mission parameters, sir." He had known Colonel Monroe for years. They had served together in different capacities, and he held a deep respect for the man's integrity and service. The mission was personal. Steele brought up another photo on the screen. It was Lydia Monroe, smiling at a charity gala, her expression bright and carefree. "This is the daughter, Lydia," Steele said, a hint of weariness in his voice. "She's the focal point. The wedding is the perfect opportunity for anyone wanting to get to her father. You'll be her shadow." Marcus studied the photo. He knew her name, had seen her picture in society pages. He knew the reputation that preceded her. Privileged, a bit wild, insulated from the real world by her father's fortune. He had filed the information away as part of the operational profile, but it was just data on a screen. He had accepted the assignment without hesitation. It was an honor to protect a man like Colonel Monroe. The idea of posing as a simple security guard didn't bother him in the slightest. A uniform was just a costume. The true measure of a man was not the clothes he wore, but the duty he upheld. Now, standing in his hotel room after the humiliating encounter at the reception, The memory of that briefing felt sharp and poignant. The irony burned. The woman he was assigned to protect, the daughter of the man he served with honor, had looked at him with such disdain, had dismissed him so completely. She had mocked his uniform, unaware that it was merely a disguise. She had insulted the man, unaware that the man was a four-star general, a leader her own father looked up to. Yet as the anger and frustration pricked at the edges of his disciplined mind, he pushed them back. Emotion was a liability. The mission was not about his feelings. It was about security, about duty. But General Steele's new order, full-dress uniform, had changed the calculus. The mission was no longer just about protection. It was now about a reckoning. Lydia's actions had inadvertently triggered a new phase of the operation. She had shown a stunning lack of judgment, a character flaw so deep that it could be considered a security risk in itself. How could a family involved in such sensitive matters afford to have such a reckless and oblivious person at its center? Marcus remained calm. He knew what was coming. The audience, the silent watchers of this story, were now his allies. They knew the truth that was still hidden from everyone in the ballroom. They knew about the uniform hanging in his closet, the one with 4 stars shining on each shoulder. They knew that the guard was not a victim but a silent judge, patiently waiting for the trial to begin. The confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but when, and it would not be a quiet affair. It would be a formal, official proceeding. The power Lydia thought she held was an illusion, a fragile bubble of privilege that was about to be burst by the sharp, unyielding point of truth. Marcus felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Justice was a slow-moving force, but it was relentless, and tomorrow morning at 1,000 hours it would arrive. The next morning the hotel was abuzz with the post-wedding cleanup. Staff moved through the hallways with a quiet efficiency, clearing away the remnants of the previous night's extravagance. Elena Torres moved with them, but her mind was elsewhere. The phone in her pocket felt heavy, like a stone. She had rewatched the video she recorded at least a dozen times in the privacy of her small apartment. Each time, Lydia's mocking voice made her flinch. Each time, she felt a fresh wave of indignation. She was torn. A part of her, the pragmatic part that needed this job to pay her rent, screamed at her to delete the video and forget everything she had seen. Her manager's voice echoed in her head. "Don't get involved, Elena," he had warned her just this morning when she had cautiously hinted at the incident. "The Monroes are some of our biggest clients. You'll lose your job. Just keep your head down and do your work." It was sensible advice, it was safe advice, but it felt wrong, it felt like cowardice. Her conscience, a stubborn and persistent voice, wouldn't let it go. It reminded her of the quiet dignity of the security guard. He had faced the humiliation head-on, without flinching. The least she could do was stand up for what was right, even if she had to do it from the shadows. Her shift was about to begin, but she found her feet carrying her in the opposite direction, toward the service elevator that led to the executive suites. She knew the security team was stationed up there. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What was she doing? This was crazy. But she couldn't turn back. She found Marcus standing in the hallway, speaking quietly with another member of the hotel's security staff. He was still in the same simple uniform. When he saw her approaching, he excused himself and turned to face her, his expression neutral. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. Elena's own voice was a nervous tremor. I'm Elena. I'm a waitress here. I saw what happened last night. At the reception." She saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, but his face remained a mask of professional composure. "I saw what the bride, Lydia, said to you, and I overheard her talking about it afterward, bragging about it." She took a deep breath, her courage solidifying. "I recorded it," she whispered, pulling the phone from her pocket. "I have it right here. I thought you should know. Maybe you can show it to someone." Marcus looked at the phone in her hand, then back at her face. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the resolve. He offered her a small, gentle smile. It was the first time she had seen him show any emotion, and it was surprisingly warm. "Thank you, Elena," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I appreciate you doing that. It took courage." He didn't take the phone. He didn't ask to see the video. Instead, he simply nodded. "But my advice to you is to stay professional. Don't put yourself at risk." Elena was confused. "But she shouldn't get away with it. It's not right." "I agree," Marcus said, his eyes holding hers. "And she won't. Sometimes you don't need to force the issue. The truth always comes out on its own." His tone was so certain, so full of a quiet confidence, that it was utterly convincing. It was as if he knew something she didn't, as if he could see the end of a story that was just beginning for her. He was reassuring her, but his eyes carried a weight she couldn't quite fathom. It was the weight of justice, patiently waiting its turn. He was telling her that a plan was already in motion. "Just hold on to it for now," he added, as if reading her mind. "You'll know if and when the time is right." He gave her another respectful nod. "Thank you again, Elena. Now you should get to your shift." He turned and walked away, his posture as straight and disciplined as ever. Elena stood there for a moment, the phone still in her hand. She felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. He hadn't needed her help, not really, but he had acknowledged her courage. And he had promised her, with his words and with his unwavering gaze, that justice was coming. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. The stone didn't feel so heavy anymore. Lydia Monroe woke up in her honeymoon suite to the soft morning light filtering through the silk curtains. She stretched languidly, a contented smile on her face. The wedding had been perfect. Every detail had been executed flawlessly, a testament to her impeccable taste and her father's bottomless bank account. She felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Last night had been her night. She was the star, the queen, and everyone had treated her as such. She picked up her phone from the bedside table, her thumb scrolling idly through the notifications. Her social media was flooded with photos and messages from the wedding. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments telling her how beautiful she looked, how perfect the ceremony was. It was the validation she craved, the fuel that powered her self-esteem. She remembered the little scene with the security guard and chuckled to herself. It had been a minor, amusing diversion. She found a post from one of her bridesmaids, a blurry photo of her confronting Marcus. The caption read, "Our Queen Lydia putting the help in their place. #boss bride." Lydia smiled and typed out a comment. "Some people just need a little reminder of who's in charge." She added a winking emoji and hit send. The likes started pouring in instantly. Her new husband, Daniel, emerged from the bathroom, toweling his hair dry. He had a look of unease on his face. He had seen her post. "Lydia, do you really think that was a good idea?" he asked tentatively. "Posting that, I mean. It seems a little mean." Lydia rolled her eyes, the smile vanishing from her face. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Daniel. It was a joke. The man was a nobody. Who cares?" Daniel looked uncomfortable, but he didn't press the issue. He had learned early on in their relationship that arguing with Lydia was a futile exercise. Her confidence was a fortress, and her father's influence was the army that defended it. He let the subject drop, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Her casual cruelty bothered him, but he was not strong enough to challenge it. Just then, Lydia's phone rang. The caller ID showed her father's name. She answered with a cheerful, "Daddy, good morning." "Lydia," Colonel Monroe's voice was businesslike, lacking its usual warmth. "I need you and Daniel to be in the hotel boardroom at 10 o'clock this morning. There's a family matter we need to discuss." Lydia's brow furrowed in annoyance. A meeting? On the first day of her honeymoon? A meeting? Now? Can't it wait? We were planning on having a late brunch. No, it cannot wait. Her father's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. This is important. Don't be late. The line went dead. Lydia stared at the phone, a frown replacing her smile. She rolled her eyes dramatically. Ugh, my father. He wants us in a meeting. Probably something boring about the family trust or something. She sighed, the weight of this minor inconvenience feeling immense to her. So much for a relaxing morning. She had no sense of the storm that was gathering just beyond the horizon. In her mind, this was just another small annoyance in a life that was otherwise perfect. Another demand on her time that she would graciously accommodate before getting back to more important things, like herself. She was completely unaware that she was not walking into a boring business meeting. She was walking into a tribunal, and she was the one on trial. The audience, the silent watchers who knew the truth, could feel the tension mounting. The trap was about to be sprung, and the bait, blissfully unaware, was walking right into it. Inside his designated suite, the transformation was complete. The simple dark blue security guard uniform lay folded neatly on a chair, a discarded skin. In its place, Marcus Hayes wore the immaculate dress uniform of a four-star general in the United States Army. The deep blue fabric was perfectly pressed, adorned with rows of colorful ribbons that told the story of a long and distinguished career. Polished medals gleamed on his chest, each one a symbol of service and sacrifice. On his shoulders, 4 silver stars shone brightly under the room's soft light. They were not just decorations. They were symbols of immense authority, of a lifetime of command. He stood before the mirror, adjusting the fit of the jacket. He looked different, taller, more formidable. The quiet dignity he had possessed in the guard's uniform was now amplified, given a name and a rank. The hidden power was now on full display. He picked up a secure satellite phone from the desk. He dialed a short, encrypted number. The call connected instantly. "This is General Hayes," he said, his voice the steady, measured tone of a man in absolute control. "Authorization code Alpha 1. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of verification. Then a calm voice replied, "Authorization confirmed, General. We are standing by." Marcus's instructions were brief and precise. "Proceed as scheduled. Secure the boardroom. No interruptions." "Yes, sir," the voice on the other end replied. "Consider it done." Marcus hung up the phone. The trap was set. The pieces were all in place. The boardroom was being prepared not for a family chat, but for a formal debriefing. General Steele was already on his way. Colonel Monroe had been summoned, told only that it concerned a matter of urgent security. Lydia and her new husband had been called, their presence non-negotiable. And Elena, the young waitress with the video on her phone, had been discreetly contacted by one of his men and asked to be available just in case. Everything was converging on a single point in time: 1,000 hours. Marcus took one last look in the mirror. He was no longer a ghost. He was the embodiment of consequence. The quiet professionalism that Lydia had mistaken for subservience was, in fact, the discipline of a warrior. The silence she had mocked was the focused calm of a leader who understood that the most powerful statements are often made without raising one's voice. The music of the story began to swell, a dramatic, imposing score signaling the coming climax. The narrative voice, a silent companion to the audience, began to tease the inevitable outcome. By noon today, the truth would not just be revealed. It would be deployed. It would break through the walls of arrogance that Lydia had built around herself. It would shatter the illusion of her superiority. And it would silence every cruel, thoughtless laugh, replacing it with a stunning, profound, and absolute silence. The general was ready. The reckoning had arrived. The hotel boardroom was a space designed for power. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The air was cool and still. Colonel Andrew Monroe and his wife Eleanor were already seated. The colonel, a man used to being in command, looked tense and confused. He had been summoned by his old friend General Steele with a cryptic message about a serious security breach. He had no idea what to expect. Eleanor sat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, sensing her husband's anxiety. A few moments later, General Steele entered. He was a formidable presence, a man who carried his authority like a cloak. But he was not alone. Walking beside him, matching him step for step, was the man Colonel Monroe recognized only as the security guard from the wedding. Except he was not in a security guard's uniform. He was in the full-dress uniform of a 4-star Army general. Medals glinted on his chest. The stars on his shoulders seemed to command the light in the room. Colonel Monroe stiffened. His military mind raced, trying to process the impossible sight before him. His eyes darted from the general's uniform to his face, a face he had barely glanced at the night before. Recognition and a dawning horror began to spread across his features. He knew who this was. He knew of General Marcus Hayes by reputation, a brilliant strategist, a hero. What was he doing here? What had happened? Just then, the boardroom doors swung open again. Lydia breezed in, her husband Daniel trailing behind her. She was 20 minutes late, an act of petty rebellion against her father's summons. "Sorry we're late," she said, her voice bright and careless. "The elevator was so slow." Her smile was wide, her mood undampened by the serious atmosphere she had just walked into. Then her eyes scanned the room. She saw her father, her mother, General Steele, a family friend she had known for years. And then she saw him. The security guard, standing there, tall and imposing, in a military uniform that seemed to radiate power. Lydia's smile froze on her face. Her mind struggled to make sense of the image. The pieces didn't fit. The man from the hallway, the janitor she had mocked, was standing beside General Steele as an equal. The casual arrogance drained from her expression, replaced by a wave of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Daniel, standing behind her, saw it too. He paled, instinctively understanding that something was terribly wrong. He had seen the smug social media post Lydia had made that morning, and a sickening feeling of dread began to churn in his stomach. The air in the room was thick with unspoken questions. Colonel Monroe looked at his daughter's stunned face, then back at the unreadable expression of General Hayes. A terrible suspicion began to form in his mind, a connection between his daughter's notoriously arrogant behavior and the presence of this highly decorated general. The carefree bubble of Lydia's world had just collided with the hard, unyielding reality of the world her father inhabited, a world of consequences, of respect, and of a rigid chain of command. And in that world she was completely, terrifyingly out of her depth. General Steele did not ask anyone to sit. He remained standing, his posture rigid, his voice commanding the silence in the room. He looked at Colonel Monroe. "Andrew," he began, his tone formal and cold, "we are here to discuss a severe lapse in operational security." Colonel Monroe nodded stiffly, his eyes still fixed on General Hayes. Steele gestured toward Marcus. "As you requested, I assigned the best man I have to oversee your family's protection detail during the wedding. For reasons of absolute discretion, he operated undercover. Allow me to formally introduce you to General Marcus Hayes." The name landed in the room like a thunderclap. Colonel Monroe's face, already pale, drained of all remaining color. He knew the name. Every senior officer knew the name. General Hayes was a legend. And this was the man his daughter had... The colonel slowly rose to his feet. He was a proud man, a man of honor, and the shame washing over him was a physical force. He turned to Marcus and offered a salute. "General Hayes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor, sir. I had no idea." Marcus returned the salute with a crisp, professional nod. "Colonel?" Lydia, who had been frozen in place, finally found her voice. It was a choked whisper. That's impossible. Her mind was reeling, refusing to accept what she was seeing. The guard. The man she had called a janitor. A general. It couldn't be real. It was a nightmare. General Steele's cold eyes shifted to her. I'm afraid it is very possible, Lydia. The narration of the moment slowed, drawing out the exquisite agony of her realization. In that single silent beat, every insult she had ever hurled, every laugh at someone else's expense, every single cruel word born of her own arrogance, returned to her. They came back not as faint memories, but as sharp, piercing blades of shame. She remembered her words. Are you lost? Guarding the dessert table? She remembered the smug satisfaction she felt, the approving laughter of her friends. And now she saw those moments through the eyes of everyone else in the room. Her father, whose face was a mask of fury and humiliation. Her mother, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Her new husband, who was staring at her with a look of utter disbelief. The entire foundation of her world, her belief in her own superiority, crumbled to dust in an instant. The man she had dismissed as a nobody was, in fact, somebody of immense importance. A man her own father saluted. A man who held more power and earned more respect in his little finger than she had ever known in her entire life. The once mocked guard now stood at the head of the table, his silence commanding the room more effectively than any shouted order ever could. Lydia felt a wave of nausea. The bright, merciless light of the boardroom seemed to be focused entirely on her, exposing her not as the queen of her own little world, but as a small, cruel, and foolish girl. Just as Lydia was about to speak, to offer some desperate, flimsy excuse, there was a soft knock on the boardroom door. At a nod from General Steele, the door opened, and Elena Torres stepped inside. She was in her simple waitress uniform, and she held her phone in her hand. She looked nervous, but her eyes were steady. She avoided looking at Lydia, instead focusing on a point on the far wall. You asked for me, sir? She said, her voice quiet but clear, addressing General Steele. Yes, Elena, thank you for coming, Steele replied. Please proceed. Elena took a deep breath. Her fingers, no longer trembling, tapped the screen of her phone. She pressed play. The room, already silent, became unnervingly still. And then Lydia's voice filled the space. It was the recording from the previous night, the audio crystal clear. And did you see his face? Her voice, giddy and cruel, echoed from the small phone speaker. He just stood there like a statue. It was priceless. I really put that guard in his place. The sound of her bridesmaid's sycophantic laughter followed. A shrill, ugly sound in the sterile boardroom. Elena let the recording play, every word a nail in the coffin of Lydia's defense. The video captured her bragging, her casual disdain, her complete lack of empathy. When the recording finished, an even deeper silence descended. Eleanor Monroe closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She looked away, unable to face the shame. Colonel Monroe's jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped in his cheek. The look he gave his daughter was one of cold, unmitigated fury. He was not just angry. He was profoundly, deeply humiliated. This was not just a matter of bad manners. In his world, the world of the military, respect was the currency of survival. Disrespecting a fellow officer was a grave sin. Disrespecting a superior officer, a man like General Hayes, was unthinkable. And his own daughter had done it publicly, casually, for sport. Lydia burst into tears. They were not quiet, remorseful tears. They were loud, hysterical sobs, the desperate wails of a cornered animal. It was a joke, she cried, her voice cracking. It was just a stupid joke. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. She looked at her father, then at General Hayes. her face a mess of tears and desperation. "Please," she begged, "I'm sorry." But her apology, born of fear and not of remorse, fell flat in the heavy silence. The damage was done. The truth had been laid bare, not just by the general's uniform, but by her own words, captured and replayed for all to hear. Throughout the entire ordeal, General Marcus Hayes had not moved. He stood motionless, his expression calm, dignified, and unbroken. He did not need to speak. His presence was his verdict. Her tears did not move him. Her pleas did not sway him. He simply stood there, a silent monument to the truth she could no longer deny. The story did not stay within the four walls of the boardroom. In a world of instant communication, secrets of this magnitude have a short lifespan. Someone in the hotel, perhaps a staff member who overheard a panicked conversation, leaked the details. It started as a whisper, a rumor on a local gossip forum. But then a photo emerged. It was a grainy cell phone picture, taken through the glass of the boardroom door, showing a distraught Lydia Monroe pleading in front of two imposing uniformed generals. The internet did the rest. Within hours, the story went viral. Social media platforms exploded with the tale of the arrogant bride and the undercover general. The hashtags, #bride vs general and #justice for Hayes, trended for days. News outlets picked up the story, splashing Lydia's face next to a distinguished official photo of General Marcus Hayes. The narrative was irresistible, a satisfying morality play of hubris and humility. The public fallout was swift and brutal. Lydia, who had built her identity around her social media presence and brand partnerships, watched in horror as her carefully constructed world imploded. The luxury cosmetic brand that had sponsored her wedding issued a public statement terminating their relationship, citing a commitment to respect and integrity. A planned feature in a glossy bridal magazine was pulled at the last minute. The guests who had laughed nervously at her jokes now distanced themselves, posting their own sanctimonious condemnations of her behavior. Her social circle, once a source of validation, now became a jury, and their verdict was unanimous. She was a pariah. The narration of her downfall was relentless, a perfect example of poetic justice. The same platform she had used to mock a man she thought was beneath her was now being used to dismantle her reputation, piece by piece. The digital laughter she had courted turned into a tidal wave of scorn. As the story unfolded, a new hero emerged. Elena, the waitress. Her role in the confrontation was highlighted, and she was praised for her courage. The moral of the story, repeated in thousands of comments and shares, became clear. Arrogance may shine for a night, but respect lasts forever. The cruel laughter that had filled the ballroom was now just a faint, pathetic echo, drowned out by a global chorus of condemnation. In the aftermath of the viral storm, a different kind of meeting took place in the same hotel boardroom. This time, the atmosphere was not one of tension, but of gratitude. Elena Torres stood before the hotel's general manager and General Steele. She was nervous, but she stood tall. The general manager, a man who had previously warned her to stay out of it, now looked at her with newfound respect. "Elena," he began, "we owe you an apology and our thanks. Your actions demonstrated a level of integrity that we value deeply here." General Steele stepped forward. He had a warm smile on his face. "What you did took real courage, young lady," he said. "It's easy to go along with the crowd. It's much harder to stand up for what's right, especially when you think no one is watching." He then informed her that in recognition of her character and bravery, the hotel was offering her a promotion to a junior management position, effective immediately. It came with a significant raise and new responsibilities. Elena was stunned into silence. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy and disbelief. She had simply done what she felt was right. She never expected to be rewarded for it. Later that day, as she was processing the incredible turn of events, she saw General Hayes. He was in a simple civilian suit now, preparing to leave the hotel. He approached her, and the bustling hotel lobby seemed to fade into the background. "I wanted to thank you personally, Elena," he said, his voice quiet and sincere. She shook her head. "Sir, you don't need to thank me. I didn't do anything." "You did more than you know," he replied, his gaze direct and kind. "You chose to see a person, not a uniform. It takes courage to speak up when no one else will. Don't ever lose that." He extended his hand. She shook it, feeling the strength and steadiness in his grip. It was the same silent strength she had seen in him when he had stood by the ballroom door, enduring the insults. She finally understood it. It wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the mastery of it. It was the power of a man who knew his own worth, regardless of the circumstances. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, General." As he turned to leave, she felt a profound sense of clarity. The world was not always fair, but sometimes, just sometimes, integrity was rewarded, and courage was recognized. And the quietest person in the room could have the strongest voice of all. A few days later, Lydia requested a final meeting. She found Marcus in a small private lounge at the hotel just before his scheduled departure. The change in her was startling. The arrogant, self-assured bride was gone. In her place was a pale, subdued woman who looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were hollow, stripped of their former fire. The expensive clothes she wore seemed to hang off her, a costume that no longer fit. She stood before him, her hands twisting nervously. "General Hayes," she began, her voice barely a whisper, I wanted to apologize for what I said, for what I did. There's no excuse for it." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "I was cruel, and I was wrong. I've spent the last few days thinking about it, about myself. I see now. I see how ugly my behavior was." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am truly sorry, and that I've learned my lesson." Marcus listened to her words without interruption. He studied her face, searching for genuine remorse behind the veil of shame and self-pity. He saw a glimmer of it, the first fragile seed of humility in a field that had long been barren. He did not offer her comfort. He did not tell her that it was okay. The lesson she was learning was a harsh one, and it needed to be fully absorbed, not softened by easy absolution. He gave a single, slow nod. "Respect isn't about who you are, or what title you hold," he said, his voice calm and even, a teacher addressing a student. "It's not something you can demand. It's something you earn, and you earn it by how you treat people. All people, especially those you think have nothing to offer you." He held her gaze for a moment longer, letting the weight of his words settle upon her. There was nothing more to say. The lesson had been given. It was up to her to carry it. He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He left her alone in the bright, merciless light of the lounge, alone with the ruins of her own making. It was a lonely place to be, but it was also the only place where she could begin to rebuild. The mission was over. In front of the hotel, a small convoy of black, official-looking vehicles waited, their engines humming quietly. The hotel staff, from the bellhops to the managers, gathered in the lobby, their usual professional demeanor replaced by a sense of quiet awe. They watched as General Marcus Hayes exited the building. He was no longer the invisible security guard they had barely noticed just a few days ago. He was a leader of men, a figure of national importance who had for a brief time walked among them in disguise. Their perception of him and of the world had been permanently altered. They saw now that a person's worth was not determined by their uniform or their job title. True authority came from within. Elena stood with them, a small smile on her face. She watched him get into the lead vehicle, his movements efficient and purposeful. He gave one last brief nod in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of their shared moment of truth. The convoy pulled away smoothly, disappearing into the city traffic, leaving behind a profound silence. The workers stood there for a moment longer, their faces lit with a newfound sense of respect, not just for the general, but for the quiet dignity that could be found in the most unexpected of places. The story of what happened at the Monroe wedding would become a legend among the hotel staff, a cautionary tale passed down to new employees for years to come. It was a reminder that you should always treat everyone with respect, because you never know who you're talking to. The final images of the story play out like a slow, cinematic montage. We see the empty ballroom, the chandeliers now dim, the silence a stark contrast to the noise and arrogance of the wedding night. We see Lydia, alone in her large empty house, looking at her own reflection with unfamiliar eyes, the weight of her lesson a heavy burden. We see Elena smiling as she confidently directs staff in her new role as a manager, her posture straight, her voice clear. And finally, we see General Marcus Hayes walking down a long, sunlit corridor, his shadow stretching out behind him. The narrator's voice closes the story, a calm and steady presence delivering the final moral. Some people only respect uniforms. They see the rank, the title, the outward symbols of power, and they offer their deference accordingly. Others respect humanity. They see the person regardless of their station, and they offer their kindness freely. But the truth, in the end, has a way of finding its own voice. It has a way of cutting through the noise, of tearing down the walls of privilege, and of humbling arrogance in the most unexpected ways. The final shot lingers on Marcus as he walks toward a bright light at the end of the corridor, a timeless symbol of quiet strength, unshakable integrity, and a respect that was not given but earned. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.